Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our second online open house for the City of Minneapolis' draft Transportation Action Plan. Happy to have you all with us here tonight. Just before we begin, a bit of housekeeping for anybody in the audience. If you experience technical issues with the broadcast, you can use the comment form that's either on the side or bottom of your screen to request help. We have staff on hand monitoring these comments, and they'll do their best to resolve any comments or issues you have. If they do persist, we will have a recording of this meeting available on our website after the meeting. We'll also be hosting one additional online open house on Thursday, May 14th from 11 to 12:30. And previous online open houses and unanswered questions will be posted on our website. Our website is go.minneapolismn.gov. Fully interactive, and we also have an email address, gompls@minneapolismn.gov. If you are unable to use the comment form, they will not be able to respond to emails during this broadcast. We appreciate your patience and understanding and look forward to hearing any of your feedback. So to begin, I'd like to first recognize my colleagues who are on this online open house with me. Most of them will be introducing themselves as they take over for part of the presentation, but 3 are providing behind-the-scenes support, and I'd like to acknowledge them and thank them here. Chris Kartheiser, Amy Morgan, and Christian Zimmerman. My name is Kathleen Mayel. I'm a Transportation Planning Manager in the City of Minneapolis Public Works Transportation Planning and Programming Division. And I'm going to lead us through the first part of this open house, and then we'll hear directly from the topic leads on more specific pieces contained in the Transportation Action Plan, and then we'll have a Q&A. Next slide, please. This is an overview of what we're going to be covering this evening, a little bit of context for the Transportation Action Plan, what our timeline and engagement has looked like to date, how the plan is structured, top highlights of the plan. Then I'll pass it off to my colleagues for topic-specific strategies, a quick slide on how to join the conversation, and we'll open it up for Q&A with the remaining time that we have together. Next slide. One piece here on the impacts of COVID-19 to our planning process for the draft Transportation Action Plan. All of our engagement has transferred online. Our website was designed to be very interactive with many ways to comment, so that continues to be available to comment direct on our strategies and actions or network maps. And we have extended our comment period, our initial end date, by a month to be open through May 22nd. And we will evaluate that as needed. Next slide, please. So to go through a bit of context, next slide. The Transportation Action Plan comes out of really Minneapolis 2040, which is the City of Minneapolis's comprehensive plan looking out 20 years. Transportation was one of 11 topics covered with that planning effort, and there was 24 transportation-related policies within that document. This is adopted city policy. It was adopted by Minneapolis City Council last year, and there are 4 main transportation themes that really come out of Minneapolis 2040. One is around environment and working aggressively to reduce fossil fuels and greenhouse gases caused by vehicles. Safety, which is really in line with our Vision Zero efforts and really preserving life on our streets and reducing impacts of traffic crashes. Equity is that we're working toward equitable outcomes for all people through our transportation network, providing mobility and access. And mobility, our multimodal options, increasing the safety, ability, and comfort for those walking, biking, and taking transit in our city. So Minneapolis 2040 really defines what we're trying to accomplish with this plan. And the Transportation Action Plan more specifically defines how we plan to accomplish that vision. So that is where this plan is rooted in previously adopted city policy. Next slide, please. With the Transportation Action Plan, we really are looking at streets which are a huge asset within the city. 22% of the land area in the city is our public right-of-way, and that's land held in trust for the public good. And through this action plan, we're really looking to use streets and highlight them as places for people, recognizing them as an invaluable asset that we can leverage our broader citywide outcomes. We can reflect our values, and we can create a more sustainable, equitable, safe, and prosperous city through thoughtfully planning, building and constructing, operating on our streets. Next slide, please. The Transportation Action Plan is a 10-year action plan. So whereas Minneapolis 2040 is 20 years, this is a 10-year horizon. We are not fiscally constrained in this plan. That was intentional to be able to set the vision. It's ambitious, but realistic. And this allows us the opportunity, should different funding opportunities that we're able to leverage, or national or regional partnerships, we're really putting out there what we want to see, and not being constrained by our current budget. So that was an intentional piece, but it's important to remember when reviewing the plan in terms of the feasibility of doing everything, within the next few years, or even within the 10 years. We're hoping to set the vision and then have resources come forward. We recognize that this plan, in order to accomplish it, takes partnership. And to that end, when you look through on our website or download the plan, every action is either identified as a do or a support action. The ones that are identified as do are those where Public Works would take the lead on accomplishing those items. Support recognizes that many things we do are supporting others who are working within the public right-of-way, be them other jurisdictional partners like Hennepin County or the state of Minnesota, Department of Transportation, and working with others toward common goals. There are 4 key city policies that are impacting how this entire plan, the approach of this entire plan. So Minneapolis 2040, which I just spoke about, our Complete Streets policy, which identifies a modal hierarchy here. You can see the 3 colored bars, people walking and rolling first, then those taking transit and biking, followed by those in a private vehicle. So that framework, you can see percolates throughout the entire plan. Vision Zero, which is our commitment to ending traffic fatalities and life-altering injuries on our streets due to traffic crashes within 10 years from when we adopted that policy, which is 2017. So that goes to 2027. And then finally, our Climate Action Plan, which puts out a bold plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050 from a 2006 baseline. So many of the actions and strategies within our plan are pinned to that as well, and look toward helping achieve the goals set out in the Climate Action Plan. Next slide, please. There have been 2 related planning efforts that Public Works has undertaken recently. Our Vision Zero Action Plan, which was adopted last December, and our Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan for Public Works, which was adopted in February of 2020. We did engagement simultaneous at different times throughout the past year plus on all 3 of these planning efforts, and we've listened to the feedback that people have given through those different efforts and incorporated as appropriate into the different planning documents. So you'll see we're not trying to repeat ourselves within these plans, but we do try to elevate and support and leverage off of these plans, one with the other, to accomplish citywide goals. And you can see that specifically with different actions that call out the Vision Zero, some of the actions within the Vision Zero Action Plan, or more broadly, a lot of the strategies and actions within our walking topic, really supporting the work of the Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan. Next slide, please. So to give a brief summary of where we have been with our planning efforts and engagement, next slide, please. Again, this is rooted with Minneapolis 2040, and that engagement spanned 3 years, parts of 3 years, between 2016 and 2018. And the city received a lot of comments about transportation during that planning process. We have read all of them, we have summarized them, and that input is part of what provides the foundation for this plan. We have on our Go Minneapolis website, on our Get Involved page, you can see a summary of those. In our phase 1 summary, we talk about the main themes that we received during that engagement. So that very much informed the plan. And then moving to the Transportation Action Plan, our first phase was in summer of 2018, some light touch engagement around different city events, open streets, farmers markets, different festivals. And that is also summarized in our phase 1 engagement summary. Phase 2, which is really the bulk of our engagement to date, was the first half of 2019, where we had a whole variety of ways we engaged with folks. Conservatively, we estimate we connected with over 3,000 people, more than 4,000 comments. We partnered with our Neighborhood and Community Relations Department on community dialogues with different cultural communities that are sometimes hard to connect with. So we did several of those. Summaries of that effort are on our website, as well as where you can find within our draft transportation action plan, different strategies and actions that reflect the concerns and ideas of those communities. We also partnered with 6 different neighborhood groups, artists, community organizations to help extend our engagement approach. And that information is also summarized in our phase 2 engagement summary, which brings us to this last phase, which is happening now through May 22nd, where we are collecting thoughts and input feedback on the draft that we have released. Next slide, please. This slide just shows one question we asked. We asked this at a lot of our different events, not all of them. This represents the answers of over 330 people. And we asked, dream big, what would transform transportation in Minneapolis in the next 10 years? And transit was such a huge response that we received from this question, but overall of our engagement. And so you'll see that reflected in our work, and just wanted to share a visual of some of the things that we heard a lot about, buses, pedestrian, car, streets, public, but transit really overshadowed all of that in terms of a lot of the things that people were talking and bringing up during our engagement. This is the 2019 engagement. Next slide, please. So we, again, just to summarize what I said at the beginning, the comment period is open through May 22nd. We have 1 additional online open house. There is a toolbox available on our website if folks would like to host their own community or neighborhood virtual gathering to discuss the Transportation Action Plan. So there's a short presentation, a form you can fill out that you can use. And we're planning on bringing this to City Council for adoption later this year. Next slide, please. Our website is really interactive, and I just wanted to share a couple slides of it, screenshots of the website in case you haven't taken a look yet. But so you can dive right into the different topic areas. Next slide, please. And for each topic area, you can see there's the pink boxes are like for transit, there's 6 strategies. And each, where it says see also strategies, a lot of this work really doesn't fit neatly in one category. So while the plan is broken up into different topic areas, we're not repeating different strategies. So a street operation strategy could apply equally to transit as it does street operations. So those are noted as well. And then at the bottom there, you can see there's maps, which if you go to the next slide, please. This is when you click on an actual strategy, it'll show you all the different actions. So this plan is developed, there's 7 topic areas. Each topic area has a number of strategies, and each strategy has a number of actions. You can comment right there on the particular strategy or action. And you can see the different goals that each action supports, as well as the level of difficulty, either low, medium, or high, And this is just to share a bit about what a bit of transparency about when things or how difficult it might be to action. Next slide, please. And then finally, there is this a little bit later in the presentation, but you can comment directly on those network maps as well. Next slide, please. So to go over a bit of the plan structure, next slide, please. There are 6 looking to reshape the transportation system to address climate change using technology, design, and mobility options to aggressively reduce greenhouse gas emissions caused by vehicles. The safety goal is to reach Vision Zero by prioritizing safety for all people and eliminating traffic fatalities and severe injuries by 2027. Equity, build and operate a transportation system that contributes to equitable opportunities and outcomes. The options that move people and goods through reliable connections, retain top talent, and grow Minneapolis as the economic engine of the region. Mobility, embrace and enable innovation and advances in transportation to increase and improve mobility and access options for all. And finally, active partnerships. Create and seize opportunities to achieve shared goals and responsibilities through partnering and leveraging funding opportunities with national and regional partners and others who invest in the city. So all of our actions speak to one or more of those goals. And these are the different topic areas. So there are 7. The shorthand: walking, bicycling, transit, technology, freight, street operations, and design. And we'll spend some times on each of these. The latter half of the presentation is diving into more specifically these topic areas. Next slide, please. There are 4 networks that are put forth in this plan. Our first is the Pedestrian Priority Network. The second, All Ages and Abilities, which is our bikeway network. And then we have a map of transit priority projects. And finally, our truck route network. This is the existing truck route network. We do have an early action item to update this network. And our topic leads will dig into those for a little bit more when they take over. Next slide, please. There are 10 plan highlights that I want to share before passing it off to my colleagues. So the first, with this plan, we plan to reach a mode share goal in pursuit of climate goals, where 3 of every 5 trips are taken by walking, rolling, bicycling, or transit by 2030. We look to improve the experience of people walking and rolling by creating things such as a pedestrian plaza program, including pedestrian lighting on all street reconstruction projects, and many actions focused on safer street crossings. This plan for transit, freight, and technology, these are all areas that we haven't, as a city, with our past planning efforts, Access Minneapolis, spent as much time or effort on. So I wanted to highlight that as it relates to this third bullet here, to realize a city-led transit vision, which really makes taking transit more attractive and an affordable option for more people. Part of that is expanding transit coverage so that 75% of our residents are within a 5-minute walk or a quarter mile of high-frequency transit, and 90% of residents are within a 10-minute walk, which is about a half mile of high-frequency transit. And that then along those high-frequency transit corridors, we're implementing transit advantages to make that transit service more reliable as a means to rely on. Looking to use street design for providing a more comfortable and healthier environment for all people, which would include things like more green infrastructure and trees in our street projects. Next slide, please. We're looking to act quickly to improve our streets, not always waiting for that reconstruction project, but focusing on paint and lower cost infrastructure improvements to make changes that improves street design and operations in the near term. In terms of our All Ages and Abilities Network, or bicycle network, we're looking to expand that nearly to vehicle and micromobility network, micro freight, micromobility, and green infrastructure. Adopt a strong curbside management policy, so managing that curb, that space right by the sidewalk or boulevard, prioritizing space for people and valuing those competing needs for curb space in highly used areas. And then finally, implementing a network of mobility hubs, which are places where people can connect to multiple shared transportation options, things like using the transit system as the backbone, and those are shared cars. So we have piloted that work in 2019 and looking to continue implementing that work as we move forward. So with that, I will hand it over, next slide please, to the next section, which is topic-specific strategies, to all of our topic leads who will each introduce themselves and go into more details. So thank you, Kelsey.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelsey Fote. I'm here to introduce the walking topic. This topic focuses on strategies and actions to make walking a more comfortable, welcoming, and viable option for getting around. The walking topic has 8 strategies. Each of those strategies has several actions included within it. One of these strategies is to prioritize improvements for pedestrians on a set of streets throughout the city called the Pedestrian Priority Network, or PPN for short. This draft network is roughly 560 miles of sidewalk or 280 miles of streets. It's a network that is focused on streets with existing and planned transit routes, provides connections to areas of employment, to higher density residential and commercial establishments. Streets not on the Pedestrian Priority Network are still great places to walk, but the Pedestrian Priority Network provides guidance on where to focus pedestrian improvements first to serve the most people and provide access to these key destinations. In addition to establishing a pedestrian priority network, the draft plan has 7 other strategies, including prioritizing safety and visibility improvements at street crossings for pedestrians, enhancing street lighting, ensuring access to the sidewalk network year-round, improving connections across freeways, highways, rivers, and roads, and providing high-quality spaces for pedestrians in the public realm. That's the gist of the PED topic, but I'm excited to hear your questions and comments.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Deardahl, Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator in Minneapolis Public Works. I'm the lead on the bicycling and micromobility topic, which has 11 strategies. I'll share an overview of the headline strategy for this topic, which is completing the All Ages and Abilities Network, also known as the AAA network. This is intended to help make sure people of all ages and abilities and backgrounds feel very comfortable bicycling, scooting, rolling, and walking in Minneapolis. It is made up of existing bikeway routes and 136 miles of new or upgraded bikeways, including 79 miles of protected bike lanes, 48 miles of new neighborhood greenways, and 9 miles of new trails. We are interested in getting your specific thoughts on this network. You can check out the map and share your feedback by clicking on the network map. You can comment on it there. A few additional specific highlights of this topic are a focus on safe intersections, overcoming barriers and connecting people to regional destinations, maintaining the AAA network, including bikeway detours and winter maintenance, designing bikeways that reflect the community and provide additional benefits, most notably including making it easier for people to cross the street, and a variety of other important strategies and actions that complement the bikeways themselves, including parking, education, encouragement, and measurement. That is all I have at this time. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Becca Hughes and I led the transit topic of the TAP. Transit is a critical component of the TAP, building out the Minneapolis 2040 comp plan, which calls for more growth in both population and jobs focused along and near transit corridors. And as Kathleen noted earlier, we heard a lot about transit through our engagement efforts for the TAP, and this is really one of the first times that the city has established a vision for transit in Minneapolis with a clear set of priorities, goals, and actions. And by partnering with Metro Transit, we can plan for and invest in transit priority projects that aim to improve the coverage, speed, and reliability of transit. We know that transit must be convenient, reliable, affordable, frequent, and safe in order to reduce SOV trips. Our goal is to increase transit trips to 1 in 4 trips, or 25% by 2030. So there are a total of 6 transit strategies and 45 action steps that are currently in the draft plan. Outlined here are the draft strategies. Expanding access to high-frequency transit corridors citywide. Kathleen remarked on this earlier. This references the 75% of residents within a 5-minute walk of high-frequency transit and 90% within a 10-minute walk. And we feel these are achievable through new and growing markets, neighborhood-based transit, improved cross-town service, as well as coordination with Metro Transit on Network Next and other initiatives. Increasing the speed and reliability of transit, this is where we see implementation and actions related to bus-only lanes, transit advantages like TSP, queue jumps, dynamic lanes, and others. Increased transit resources and managing capital investments. This is really about developing capital programs to help us deliver transit projects throughout the city and working with partners in CPED, among others. Pursuing new high-impact transit projects include our BRT network, our LRT network, as well as corridors that we have studied extensively in the past, including the Midtown Corridor, West Broadway, as well as Nicollet and Central. Expanding multimodal access to transit. This is really where technology, mobility hubs come into play, as well as the first last-mile connection, as well as filling sidewalk gaps and other actions. And lastly, supporting efforts to ensure transit is safe, comfortable, and affordable. This really relies on supporting current and future Metro Transit efforts. I'll close here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jasna Hadjic-Stanek, and today I will be covering the strategies outlined in the technology topic of the plan. First, I'm going to answer what is the technology topic all about. This topic outlines how we will most thoughtfully integrate technology to help us meet our goals when it comes to shared fleets, such as shared bikes and scooters, and any other future shared models that we see in our city. Electric vehicles, which includes buses, scooters, e-bikes, and vehicle cars. Connected infrastructure and connected people, which is the ability for vehicles, people, and traffic systems to talk to one another. And then lastly, the automation of transportation. So now I will jump right into our strategy. There are 7 of those in the technology topic, starting with the first strategy, which looks at safety and design of our infrastructure and streets, and how to incorporate advanced mobility elements into that, as well as how to have our streets serve as a testing ground for future pilots. Our second strategy is something we heard a lot about through engagement of the Transportation Action Plan in the past couple of years, and that's to remove barriers such as lack of smartphone, bank account, or a driver's license to shared mobility like scooter share and bike share. Our third strategy is working with private and public partners to implement innovative and ambitious pilots, such as mobility hubs, which are physical places where people can connect to with low carbon modes, including transit. Our fourth strategy is around data and the collection and sharing of data from private companies to help inform future planning and investments. Building a culture of advanced modes through education and awareness of how they work in order to realize their full potential and benefit is our fifth strategy, while our more lower strategy and priority of this topic is to encourage and support adoption of electric vehicles. And finally, our last strategy is building internal capacity within the city to advance these new initiatives and get the right balance between regulation, support for innovation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Cato. I'm the freight topic lead. This is our most robust freight planning effort to date. And it really comes at a critical time since it will help guide how goods move through and within our city. There's 8 strategies and a plethora of actions associated with that. The first one is utilizing land use tools to improve the efficiency of freight deliveries. One of the actions around that is an urban consolidation center, which is a distribution center located in the urban core that would take larger freight deliveries via large semi-trailers and break those down into smaller loads such as cargo vans and bicycles. Number 2 is on improving the safety and efficiency of freight movements. An action associated with that talks about implementing a traffic counting program so we can get better, more accurate data on freight vehicle movements within our city in terms of their routing and the volume of those trips that are occurring. Number 3 is regards to freight operators, and it'd be updating the truck route map, which Kathleen alluded to earlier in the presentation. Number 4 is on transitioning to zero emission vehicle fleet, so providing more electric charging stations for those freight vehicles to recharge their batteries. Number 5 is on implementing dynamic loading zones, so that's rethinking our curb space and providing a dynamic pricing system as well as flexibility so that we allow the most important use of the curb at the most important time of the day. Number 6 and 7 go hand in hand, and it's focused on working with the private sector and academic institutions to pilot and implement innovative solutions. I'm sure many of you have heard about drones, sidewalk robots, and things like that, and obviously there's a lot of concern, but also a lot of interest in those technologies. And as we move forward with exploring those and other technologies, we want to make sure that they're implemented in a way that aligns with our city values and is not disruptive, but actually contributes to the freight movements within our city. And lastly, we want to develop a freight education program for the public and for freight operators so that everyone is aware of how the system works and how it can be improved and also be as safe as possible. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Katie White, and I will lead us through the street operations section of the TAP. Street operations isn't modal. We don't focus in this section on any one way of getting around town, but this and the next section, which is street design, start pulling all the content that my colleagues were just talking about, pulling it together and talking about how each of the modes will interact with each other and how we approach the sharing that happens in the public right-of-way between the modes. Some of the content in the street operations plan is project-based, but also similar to the previous sections, some of the content in the street operations section is philosophical, or how the city will be approaching its discussions with our partner agencies and other people who operate within the city. And so that's something to keep in mind as you read through the section, not only the strategies, but also the actions that underlie them. There are 9 street operations sections to go through, so we have 2 slides here. The first is to update the Complete Streets policy. Kathleen provided an overview of the Complete Streets policy at the top of this presentation, and it's really been foundational. It's been really helpful within Public Works and without to define our priorities, which are to make sure that it's a safe environment for people walking and rolling most of all. The Complete Streets policy, we don't want to rewrite it from scratch, but we do need to update it. It omitted some key portions, some key parts of the city operations in its first iteration. We need to incorporate freight, as Alexander was just talking about. We need to talk about green infrastructure, which is something that was omitted the first time around. And we also need to talk about micromobility, which Yasna was talking about earlier as well. So it's not a wholesale rewriting, but we want to let people know that since this has been a visible policy, we are looking to update it. The second action here is to eliminate traffic-related deaths and serious injuries. As Kathleen was mentioning earlier, we have done significant work on Vision Zero and research and creating an action plan there. So this conversation highlights those activities that the city will be undertaking. Third is to plan for people walking, biking, using micromobility or transit through street design. This talks a little bit about how we allocate space across the city. Fourth is to promote, educate, and encourage walking, biking, and using transit. This is pretty straightforward. We have some groups that we can partner with across the city, and that's something that we're looking to do. Chris, can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks so much. The fifth is, there's quite a lot of content here that I encourage folks to take a look at, is to pricing the curb to encourage walking, biking, and using transit. When we talk about the curb, we're looking at both sides of the curb. That's a street side, as Alexander was talking about, the loading and deliveries, but also the sidewalk side. There's a lot of competing demands along the curb, and we're looking to engage in that conversation, see what the future of that topic looks like. Sixth is to induce regional mode shift through capital projects. This includes capital projects that the city is leading, and then also involvement that the city has on capital projects that other agencies might be leading in the city limits, for example, the county or MnDOT. 7 is to align traffic signal operations with the complete streets policy. And this is all modes related. This is how pedestrians interact with traffic signals, also potentially putting bicycle traffic signals on bicycle routes, and also encouraging the reduction of speed of vehicles through traffic signal timing. 8 is to coordinate with agency partners on projects within the city. This is something that is always ongoing, but we want to reiterate the city's position on this work so that they know where we are coming from when we engage in conversation with them. And 9 is to manage street detours in line with the Complete Streets policy. Part of that is the routing of detours, but also, the city has seen so much development, and that development has necessitated detours. And so what is the interaction between development and the right-of-way that they're using? And that's a really interesting conversation that people are aware of and engaged in. Thanks so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Ethan Foley, and I am the lead on the design section of the Transportation Action Plan. This section, as Katie alluded to, is again sort of bringing things together, and how do the different modes and ways that people get around that we talked about earlier in the plan, how do they come together in the physical space of a street? We only have so much street space, so how do we fit the goals of the city into that space? To help inform that work, we are developing currently a street design guide that will be out later this year. It's really a technical document that brings together the policies and actions you see in this plan down into what does it look like on different types of streets. That will be interactive and available online, and will be a resource both for our internal technical staff, but also for community members. You're going to see some of the other things in here relate back to some of the other topics. A case in point is the second strategy here around fostering vibrant public spaces for street life. You're going to see a lot of connection to the walking topic. Things like the Plaza program live here. So I think you're going to be interested in some of the ideas that are in the actions in this section in particular. Number 3 includes both carbon reduction design elements, but also some other environmental related things that are really technical in nature, and how are we reducing our environmental impacts from how we build streets and maintain and operate them as well. Greening the streets is both about having an attractive tree canopy and other things that make it a great place to be, but also about expanding our work on stormwater management so that we're reducing runoff and we're able to into our streams, and also that we're able to deal with flooding, which is becoming a bigger issue. Then we have some things about making sure we're bringing in transit improvements into our streets as well. And the final strategy here is really a very technical one about how we're interacting with other agencies that impact our ability to design our streets. So that wraps up our topics in the section, and now we'll transition to Q&A. Thanks so much.
So thank you all. That was an overview of the 55 different strategies that are in the draft Transportation Action Plan. Those 55 strategies contain over 280 individual actions. So again, I encourage you to dig into the plan and give us detailed comments back on what you see. So next slide, please. Just a summary of ways to engage. So that top line, I'm sorry, should say there's one more additional open house, and that is on our website. There's the website link, the toolbox that I mentioned, social media hashtag GoMPLS. And with that, I'm going to turn it over. Please keep giving us your questions through that comment panel. Turn it over to Jenny Hager, Director of our division, Transportation Planning and Programming. Jenny.
Great, thanks Kathleen, and hello and welcome to everyone who has joined us here this evening. As Kathleen mentioned, my name is Jennifer Hager and I am the Director of Transportation Planning and Programming, and I will moderate the Q&A for this evening. I want to thank you all again for joining us, and also thank this phenomenal team who has put together this draft Transportation Action Plan and these online engagement opportunities for all of you to read and comment and provide your input and thoughts with us tonight and in the other engagement opportunities that we are offering. So thank you for that. We look forward to hearing from you. We will try to get to as many of your questions as we can during our time here this evening. So we have scheduled until about 8:30 tonight. So any questions that remain in the chat board that we do not get to, we will answer in writing and post onto our website once we get those responses pulled together. We did that after the first online open house, and you can find those responses posted on our website right now. If you do not get your question put up onto the chat board tonight, the best way to get your question put before us is through an email to our project email, which is up on the slide right now. Thank you, Chris. So with that, with no further delay, we will start with our questions. And the first one is going to go to Kathleen. Kathleen, how are we revising the plan to social distance and or make safe for future pandemics? Kathleen, are you there?
Can you all hear me?
There you are.
Okay, great, thanks. That's a great question. Thank you for the question. It's one we've gotten a bit, and while this is a 10-year plan, we also have one of the plan highlights is that we act quickly, right, to make changes now. So just to share a little bit about things that are in the draft plan that we're even seeing action on now. We have, as a city, transitioned at more than 400 of our signalized intersections, our traffic signals to reduce the need or eliminate the need for pedestrians to push the button. And we're placing signs on those posts so that people do not need to touch the buttons to cross the street. That is called out in our pedestrian or our walking strategy 2, I believe it is. So that's one example of how something's gotten advanced that is in the draft plan in light of COVID and the pandemic. We've worked with curbside management already in the last month and a half to issue permits for pickup zones for businesses to help those businesses thrive and survive during this time, for people to do quick pickup or curbside takeout for either food or other items for businesses that have been open. We've also, together with partnering with the park board, we've created or are in the process of creating, jointly with the park board, 40 miles of Stay Healthy streets. So these are spaces that are more open to those biking and walking and have more space, limiting that through traffic, residential access only, to make it so that people are able to be outside in safe ways that they're able to socially distance. So like everyone during this time, we are in a learning mode and a processing mode. We have the foundation of this draft plan to really pull on now and lean on. I mean, it's not adopted yet, but as we move forward for these ideas that we've worked through the public with and others, so we'll continue to adapt and continue to make progress as we see fit and adjust to the new norms that we're seeing out there due to the pandemic.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. Matthew, this next one is coming your way. Matthew, on the AAA map, how can we tell if a proposed bikeway is a protected bike lane or a neighborhood greenway? And is there a photo gallery of examples of each?
Thank you for the question. So we don't specifically note in the TAP which streets will be protected bike lanes or neighborhood greenways. We wanted to maintain a little bit of flexibility as we design the streets moving forward. But one thing that I will note is if you know of a street that's on the AAA network and it currently feels really busy, and you may not feel super comfortable biking in that street right next to cars, it's a good bet that that street would be a protected bike lane. And then conversely, if there's some streets that are on the AAA network that are currently pretty calm, but may cross some busy streets, may connect to schools, things like that, it's also a good bet that that would be a neighborhood greenway. So the vision kind of depends on how busy it is from a traffic perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Becca, this next one is going to come to you. How will the plan address streetcar? This plan does not directly address streetcar.
That is correct. Thanks for the question, Jenny. That's correct. The plan doesn't currently address streetcar in the transit section. This was also intentional. We basically did not identify specific modes, but what we did is we identified specific corridors that we felt could benefit by having improved transit, whether that's enhanced or improved buses or other types of mechanisms to support transit service. The three focus areas specifically, I mentioned West Broadway, Nicollet Central. Those are two of the three that we'll be looking to advance through this plan. And so, yes, we intentionally do not address streetcar. If there's a chance or an opportunity to look at other modes, we will do that in order to advance transit overall.
Great, thank you, Becca. Kathleen, this next one is going to come your way. Why do you have to say your name to comment? I'm nervous about commenting with my name attached to it.
Sure, fair question. There are a couple reasons why we ask for this information. We know in a public comment process, it's important that those who comment do so in a thoughtful manner and are accountable to their comments. So when we ask for this information, it's a bit more similar to coming to a public event and speaking or providing written comments. So that's a big part of it. It also helps us understand if we are getting multiple comments from the same person or hearing the same comment from many different people. So that's the reasons why we ask for it. And then in terms of zip code, why we ask for that is just understanding where we're hearing from people and if we're hearing from people in all parts of the city or if there are areas where we're not reaching as many folks.
Great, thank you. Katie, this next one is coming your way. Street Operations Strategy 5. The speaker said it included the other side of the curb due to competing demands. What does this look like?
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks for this question. When we look at both sides of the curb, we want to, well, first of all, we'll be developing a curbside policy in the near future, and that's a product that is going to come out as a result of this transportation action plan. But what we're looking at is for the use of the curb to reflect the city's values, and you've seen that in the discussion about, for example, the mode share split and how we're prioritizing people walking, biking, or taking transit. So if we were to say that the entire curb for an entire city block will be reserved for car share or vehicle loading, that wouldn't be reflective of the city's values. And so we're looking to create something that's slightly more uniform than what we have today, something that's easy to understand. Our Complete Streets policy has that really great graphic that Kathleen showed that's really easy to understand. And I don't know if it looks like a graphic for the curbside policy, it might, but we're looking to have something that's just as simple that we can say is a goal across all projects for all curbs, across the city. We don't know what that looks like yet because the development of that hasn't started, but that's our goal.
Great, thank you. This next one is going to start with Kelsey and then go to Matthew. Kelsey, can you please talk more about how winter walking and rolling will be improved in the plan? And then Matthew, you can follow up.
Sure. So we have a strategy on winter walking and rolling. There's a number of actions outlined in that strategy. They're building off of some earlier work that we did called the Winter Maintenance Study, and I think that was finished up in 2018. So we took some of those findings and really dug into them a bit more. The actions that you see in the plan for the Transportation Action Plan, they focus on expanding awareness of the importance of clearing snow and ice, just communicating how important it is to have those clear pathways for people to get around in the winter, clearly defining the roles and responsibilities under the current ordinance. That ordinance requires that property owners take a lot of that responsibility in clearing and keeping their sidewalks clear for people to get around, and communicating how to find help for those who are unable to clear their sidewalks. And there's quite a few in there on streamlining the inspection process and the enforcement process for how the city checks in on how we're doing with sidewalk clearance.
So I would add a couple of things for the bicycling component, and I guess the first one is building a network of protected bike lanes and trails and neighborhood greenways. I think is as much a winter strategy as it is a summer strategy. We have biking 12 months out of the year in Minneapolis, and we want to make sure that people feel comfortable the whole time. Now, with protected bikeways in particular, I've often said that they are probably even more important for winter riding than summer, because we do struggle with standard or regular bike lanes in the street that often get encroached by parked cars and other things. So protected bikeways are generally very good for winter riding, I guess, respectively. And then the other thing is winter maintenance of this new idea of the neighborhood greenways, or low volume residential routes. We want to explore how we can match the level of service of protected bikeways, which is currently a level of service to clear those bikeways within 24 hours. So that's another important action in TAP.
Thank you both. Next question will go to Becca. Becca, what types of transit advantage treatments will the city use on streets beyond bus lanes and transit signal priority?
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks for the question. That's a great question. One of the strategies that we also use and implement throughout the city are called queue jumps, and those are things that we typically use at proximate to intersections. Also inline stops. You see that infrastructure with buses stopping in lane. That provides transit advantage for Metro Transit buses, and you're seeing that more frequently on high frequency transit routes as well as BRT routes. And last but not least, dynamic lanes, which are basically a modified version of a bus lane. We have those currently operating on Hennepin Avenue in South Minneapolis, where we have AM peak bus lanes that are dedicated in the morning, curbside. They're used for parking outside of those dedicated hours. And then conversely, in the PM peak, we have bus lanes that operate where parking is not permitted. However, parking is permitted throughout the day. So those are lanes. Dynamic lanes are considered transit advantages, as they provide transit advantages for transit to be able to operate in their own lane during the times that they need it most.
Great, thank you. Next question is going to Kathleen. Kathleen, in terms of the transit mode share goal, where do car share memberships like Our Car or Zipcar fit into meeting the goal of 3 out of 5 trips using mode share? Would taking Lyft or Uber meet that goal?
Thanks for the question. So in terms, 2 different things there. So if you're taking an Our Car or Zipcar, from the data on mode share, that's still a 1 trip in 1 car. So that would be a single occupant vehicle. If you're talking about Uber or Lyft, that's even more complicated. I mean, for you, it would be, if you're popping in an Uber or a Lyft, that would be a multi-occupant trip for you. The Uber or Lyft driver, however, on the tail ends of that, would be in a single occupant vehicle trip. So those are not considered transit. Those would be considered either single or multiple occupant vehicle trips.
Great, thank you. This next question is going to go to Kelsey. Kelsey, how does the City of Minneapolis Walking Routes for Youth map fit into the Transportation Action Plan? Will infrastructure improvements continue to be prioritized on it, or do the All Ages and Abilities Network and the Pedestrian Priority in TAP replace it?
You know, that's a really good question. I don't think I have a immediate answer for it. I know that we've been talking about how to use that Walking Routes for Youth map in the future. I can tell you that the Pedestrian Priority Network did use some of the same criteria that went into that Walking Routes for Youth in generating the pedestrian routes. Namely, schools was one of the destinations that was a big influence in how that map was generated. There's a lot of overlap in the two maps. If we're looking at the Pedestrian Priority Network, many of the, I would say, prioritized crossings are those that are also prioritized on major streets in the Walking Routes for Youth. So I think we still have a little bit of work to figure out how the two fit together and where we move forward from here.
Thank you, Kelsey. Matthew, did you have anything you'd like to add to that from the bicycle perspective?
Yeah, I would just like to add, so first of all, the Walking Routes for Youth map is part of a comprehensive Safe Routes to School strategy, and that map was developed in partnership with Minneapolis Public Schools many years ago. I think part of the question too was whether or not TAP would replace that map. And I would say technically, yes, I guess, in the sense that TAP would be official policy of the city of Minneapolis. But the Walking Routes for Youth is really important, and especially for people directly surrounding schools that are using it, and students that are using it to get to school. If I recall correctly, because that was before my time, the existing Bicycle Boulevard map was an important part of those routes, and we used that network as a really important starting point for the AAA network as well. I know they don't align perfectly, but that was definitely something that we considered very much in the development of our AAA network.
Great, thanks both. This next one is going to go to Kathleen. Kathleen, when we say that this plan has to be adopted, does that mean that the city council approves it, or does it involve the state legislature?
This plan will be adopted by the Minneapolis City Council. There's no state level authority adopting this plan. One piece, the street design guide, that's a separate piece of this as well. So the draft transportation action plan with revisions will be adopted by the city council.
Great, thank you. This next question is going to start with Matthew, and then Ethan can assist. Matthew, which streets will be car-free, pedestrian-only by 2030?
So I'll address this by talking again about neighborhood greenways. I can't name specific streets that will specifically be car-free, but one of the ways that we'll get to that answer is implementing neighborhood greenways. And I'm realizing that we haven't really defined neighborhood greenways in this conversation today, so I just want to do that really quick. So neighborhood greenways are similar to what we call bike boulevards now, in that they'll be low volume residential streets that are converted to be much more friendly to people walking and biking. We want to optimize travel for pedestrians and bicyclists by either eliminating or significantly reducing motor vehicle use. And so that's kind of how it's tied into this question is there will be about 50 miles of streets that we look at converting to these neighborhood greenways. And not all of them will be car-free streets. Some of them may retain cars and just make it more pleasant for people to walk and bike. Others may remove half the street and use that extra space for people walking, biking, and extra green space. And then there may be some blocks and sections of streets that do fully remove motor vehicle access. And I believe Ethan may have some thoughts on this.
I would just add that in the design section of the plan and the foster vibrant public spaces strategy, number 2, we do have that we'll be exploring these opportunities for car-free streets. As part of that, we do plan to have some information around how we would do that in the street design guide that will be coming out later this year.
Great, thanks, gentlemen. Next question is going to go to Becca. In transit, the TAP shows a walk shed for transit. What does this mean, and what teeth does the city have to do this? Will the city be funding Metro Transit service hours in the future to expand transit frequency?
Thanks, Jenny. That's actually a great question. The walk shed is basically a calculation or a benchmark to understand where we are and where we want to be relative to transit. You know, the city's priority is to provide and make high frequency transit accessible and proximate to more residents in the city. It certainly requires a partnership with Metro Transit, but we are also looking to establish our own capital programs to help advance our city goals and priorities relative to transit. How that supplements Metro Transit funding in the short and in the long term is yet to be determined.
Great, thanks, Becca. Next question is going back to Matthew. Matthew, do we know what the protected bike lanes will look like versus greenways, for example? Are there renderings or pictures or examples available?
Oh, that is a good question. I think protected bikeways will look very different across the city. One way I would recommend finding out the answer to that question is to go on a bike ride. In Minneapolis right now, we have a lot of examples of protected bikeways in Minneapolis and all parts of the city. And so it really does range from the standard, I guess I'm calling it the standard, but one of our first implementation types was using bollards, or those white plastic posts you see in the buffer between the travel lane and the bike lane. We have since started to upgrade our protected bike lanes to using curbs or concrete, essentially medians or barriers between the travel lane and the bike lane. And then we're very excited about some of our reconstruction projects, particularly in downtown, Hennepin Avenue, in 4th Street. We're reconstructing the street, and that really gives us a great opportunity to build basically sidewalk level protected bikeways, or protected bikeways that are up on the sidewalk.
Thank you, Matthew. Next question is going to go to Ethan. Ethan, this question is a multi-part question, but I'm going to hone in on the last part of it, which is essentially asking if alternative bicycle types, especially those that are larger in nature and have large turning radii, are somehow being accommodated in our designs on the street and in our street design guide.
That's a great question, and I think Matthew might add a little bit if he'd like from the bicycling perspective. It is something that we will definitely have to think about within the details of our street design guide and how things come together. We'll note within that guide that we are really trying to understand how everything fits in our tight, congested, constrained corridors, and how really do you make it work well to have a protected bikeway with a sidewalk, with boulevard. And then we also have to think about these details as well as making sure the intersections are working well. So we're looking at things like protected intersection designs and making sure we have that consistent across the city. And so doing that in a way that works for a variety of bicycle types is an important consideration.
Ethan, I will add, I just love this question as well. This is really important as a lot of new vehicle types emerge, new bicycle vehicle types emerge. I myself bought an electric assist bike last year, and just thinking about how we incorporate those into our street design is really important. And then on the specifics of street design, I have definitely raised this issue, and a lot of our planners do, when we're considering bikeways, and just thinking about how our trails may curve, or how wide some of our bridge crossing, our bridges might be, and sometimes there's curves on the bridges like 5th Street across I-35. Just trying to make sure that they're 14 feet instead of 10 feet or 8 feet, so that somebody with a trailer could make that turn. So it's definitely something we think about, and we need to continue to do that in our street projects.
Thanks, guys. Next question is going to Katie. Katie, how feasible is street operations section 5.7 congestion pricing? This is a crucial element of the TAP to increase equity, reduce emissions, and improve. If parking is employer provided or cheap, as it often is, there are few barriers to driving. This strategy should be coupled with strategy 5, which is about extending curb pricing, so that it is financially disadvantageous to drive. We need to make it cheaper to take transit or bike or walk than to drive in order to meet our 2040 climate and safety goals.
Thanks, Jenny. This is a great question. I'll start with this. With a question started with how feasible is it? And you're looking at action 5.7, and Kathleen was saying, there are do and there's support, and so here this one says do. And what is the verb that we put in here? We put study. I agree that congestion pricing is a pretty big issue, and it's huge, and it would be a game changer. And right now we're committed to studying. When we chose these verbs, we wanted them to be, realistic within the 10-year time frame of the plan. And so we are committing to studying the issue. But then if you look all the way over on the right-hand side of the page, it says difficulty level high. And that is us saying, yes, we know it's a big deal. Yes, we know it's important. And yes, we know it's going to be a challenge. New York City struggled with this several years ago and was shot down by the state legislature. And so we know it's not just a technical issue of how do you physically create a congestion pricing system in the city of Minneapolis, but there's also policy considerations and other stakeholders beyond those within Minneapolis Public Works who are going to need to be brought along as we study this. So that's the level of commitment that's provided here. And as to the rest of the comment about pricing in general, yes, all of strategy 5 is about pricing. And I'll just echo what I said earlier and say that we want our pricing structures to reflect our values. What was it, a year or two ago, meter rates in downtown are now slightly variable and slightly higher in certain areas in order to promote turnover of vehicles instead of just parking once all day for a pretty cheap rate. And so I think that that's true for all the actions here in section 5. We want pricing of the curb to promote our values, walking, biking, transit. We want driving downtown to promote our values, walking, biking, transit. And so that's baked in throughout this section.
Thank you, Katie. Next question is going to Matthew. Another question about bicycling. For bicycling number 3, are we going to have a citywide policy regarding greenways so that every decision, such as diversion placement or parking removal, won't have to be litigated in council or public works meetings? I'm worried that every action in this topic is going to be a block by block fight with local residents unless there is a citywide policy.
All right, thank you for this question as well. One thing I'll note is that TAP will be adopted city policy when it is adopted by City Council in the near future. But I will say that the details will be important for this one, and effective public engagement I think will be critical because this is such a new concept, the idea of greenways. And then the nice thing about the vision of neighborhood greenways is that they are flexible by design. We think there's a lot of opportunity to make sure that everybody's needs are taken into account as we plan these routes. And again, there's a theme here, but maybe Ethan can weigh in on the street design component. But we're working on guidance for neighborhood greenways in the document, and that should be really complementary to TAP in this regard.
I think Matthew covered it. We're definitely going to have those guidelines for when it makes sense, and we have the support of community members to implement a Greenway.
Thank you both. Next question is going to go to Ethan. Ethan, how can residents help accelerate the conversion of county 4-lane streets to 3 lanes? These changes would be such a welcome improvement for safety and comfort of people walking and biking, and would make driving a little simpler too.
So we do have a specific action related to 4-lane undivided streets, actually in the street operations section of the plan. And that's because 4-lane undivided streets are typically our least safe streets for everyone, because they don't manage left turns safely. And left turns are frequent in an urban environment. And so over the last 15 years, the county and the city have converted a lot of our 4-lane undivided streets to a 3-lane section where there's 1 lane in each direction and then a left turn lane. And up to this point, we've converted what I would call a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and we're starting to move into really analysis and pushing forward with taking the next step and going farther on those conversions to really support safety. Now, I'd recognize that in a lot of those, it is a community conversation, and we recognize that sometimes there may be rush hour traffic impacts. And what we said as a city overall, both in this plan and in the Vision Zero action plan, which was adopted last December, is that safety is a big priority for us, and we are going to make proactive work on addressing those 4-lane undivided streets, both on the county system, but also on the city and MnDOT system. So I think recognizing that community feedback is always valuable and helping move these things forward, I encourage people to stay engaged on that topic, and do know that we are being intentional and proactive on it from the city perspective.
Thanks, Ethan. Next question goes to Katie. Katie, how will the city eliminate level of service? What will this mean in practice? Do traffic engineers at the city agree with this? What instead will be used to evaluate general purpose traffic operations?
Thanks, Jenny. I guess I want to nitpick this just a little bit and call out the language that we're using in Action 3.2, because this is a really important issue, as I'm sure the person who suggested this comment knows about. It says to discontinue the use of vehicle level service except where necessary to meet funding, legislative, or other jurisdictional requirements. So the intent is to not use vehicle level of service in city projects as a determining factor. I think that LOS is a useful thing to know about a project. I don't think it should be the last thing we know or the determining factor of what we know about a project before we determine what it looks like. I think that we need to go back to what I've been saying before, highlight the city's values here, having a climate change goal, having a Vision Zero goal. The City Council has taken action over the last few years to say that those are the priorities that we need to be looking for. The City Council has not taken a vote to say that level of service is the defining characteristic of what they want to make decisions based on. But at the same time, we do need to be realistic in understanding that sometimes LOS is important for city projects in order to meet other goals that are related to funding or legislative requirements or other jurisdictional requirements. And so that's recognizing that Minneapolis is a partner with other people with other priorities. And so we need to be respectful of that and work with our partners. Again, in the document on the page, it's written, this is a medium level of difficulty. because it's something that we can do internally on our projects at the city, but for external projects, it's just a different value system that we need to work with.
Thank you, Katie. Next question is going to go to Kathleen. Kathleen, what role does possible additional revenue streams fit in funding this plan? For example, raising city gas taxes, if that is even possible, given the Minnesota legislature unfortunately failed to do so.
Good question. This plan, the short answer is very little. We are not identifying in this plan revenue sources or how to fund all this. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this intentionally is not fiscally constrained. The role of this plan and in this effort is to put forth a vision of what our streets can and we hope will be and we can plan for and will be within 10 years. And then as it gets adopted into city policy by the city council, it is then the role of the policymakers, the mayor and the city council members to figure out and allocate funds and budgets and whatnot, which is their job. So our role in this plan is to put forth the vision and the plan, and then the budget piece is separate intentionally. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Kathleen. Next question is going to Ethan. Ethan, how is the plan being reconsidered now that we see higher speeding and more deadly crashes occurring with the COVID restrictions? How does it reprioritize any of the strategies?
Certainly the COVID-19 emergency has shaken a lot of things up, and we have to think about that overall. We have seen statewide in Minnesota that while traffic crashes are down significantly since the emergency order was put in place, traffic fatalities are up significantly. And that is almost exclusively due to increased speeding and aggressive driving. So we recognize and have recognized in this plan, as well as in the Vision Zero Action Plan, the importance of lowering speeds to support safety on our streets. That remains a key strategy and approach in both plans. We see that maybe even more so coming to the forefront of how important that is, because slower speeds make it safer for everyone. They make a crash less likely, and they make it less likely to be deadly. So as we have recently lowered speed limits, and we're on city-owned streets, all city-owned streets in the city. We're in the process of implementing that this summer and into the fall. And we're also going to be, we're delayed just a little bit because of COVID, but we're going to be starting to push out additional messages about the importance of that change for safety, to really help bring community members along and have it be meaningful. But we also recognize that additional steps are needed, and the speed limit change is a starting point for safe speeds. So that's reflected in this plan and others. We're going to be narrowing streets up more in our street design guide to support safety. We'll be introducing other elements into the kind of typical designs we're looking at to control speed. We are also looking at updating our traffic calming procedures and other things to support traffic calming improvements citywide. So those are all things that we're going to be continuing to move forward with. The Vision Zero Action Plan, which is separate from the Transportation Action Plan, as Kathleen mentioned, does include other strategies that relate to education and equitable enforcement and other things that play a role there as well. So additional details there. I don't know that we necessarily need a reprioritization within this plan because safe speeds have been a priority for us overall.
Thank you, Ethan. Next question is going to Matthew. Matthew, the TAP mentions making improvements to some, but not all, of the existing bike boulevard miles. Is there a map or a list to describe which bike boulevards will see improvements?
Thank you for this question. So I believe this is Bicycling 3.1, which notes that we have 21 miles of existing bicycle boulevards and that we plan to make improvements to 10 miles of the existing routes. We don't have a specific list or a specific map of those routes at this time, but the reason that we included that is we wanted to acknowledge that the existing bike boulevards that we have aren't all at the level that we want for a really great, robust neighborhood greenway system, and so that we just wanted to acknowledge that we would be upgrading those routes, and some that I think are good candidates are the River Lake Greenway, which is 42nd and 40th Street, east-west across South Minneapolis. And then there's the President's Bike Boulevard, connecting Columbia Heights to downtown Minneapolis across the Stone Arch Bridge in Northeast. I think I mentioned that. So a couple of those, like the first ones that we implemented over the past 10 years, would fit within that probably. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. This next one is going to come to you as well. So the plan mentions support for Minneapolis public schools providing universal bike education, which is excellent. Would it make more sense for the city's staff who work on this to be public works staff, health department staff, or some other approach?
So I think that's a good question, and that strategy, and I don't have it in front of me right now because of the back-to-back question here, but that talks about supporting the Minneapolis Public Schools Safe Routes to School strategic plan that calls for that strategy. And I think at this time, we are, I guess, acknowledging or committing through TAP to partnering with MPS on that. I'll just say we haven't explored or put a lot of thought into taking that on as a city-led strategy at this time.
Thank you, Matthew. This next one is going to go to Kelsey. Kelsey, does the TAP provide a way for a neighborhood to ask for a low-cost pilot for a super block setup? And this is in reference to the super blocks being done in Barcelona's urban planning.
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. We looked at super blocks as they're used in Barcelona to get some inspiration for the plan. There's a really great strategy in the design topic, actually, that goes through a number of programs and improvements that improve streetscapes for people. And one of these is a Minneapolis Plaza program looking at converting underutilized street space for pedestrians. Right now, we're still in kind of the phase where we're in the same kind of feel that we're looking at where these are the right fit for the different contexts that they can around the city. And so if there are specific ideas about specific locations or ideas about what this could look like, I think it's very much in the infancy of what we're thinking about, that we would love to hear some feedback on what ideas there are that are akin to the Barcelona super blocks. So please leave your comments with us.
Thank you, Kelsey. Next question is going to go to Kathleen, and this gets at how we're going to measure some of our work with the plan. Are we looking at putting in the carbon impact into the discussion for different design options as well? We talk about level of service, costs, and timelines, yet the question or the person asking the question says they're not hearing how measurable impacts might be shown.
Great question. We have certainly as a goal and a specific, addressed in the strategies and actions as well. If you look at design action 3.3, reducing negative environmental impacts of street designs by decreasing the amount of asphalt or concrete in favor of increasing green space. So the question though about how are we measuring that, that's a piece that we don't necessarily have all the tools to do right now. We do have in the back of the plan, there's a section on progress, and we talk about different metrics that we will be reporting on either on an annual or every 2-year basis. And some of them are ones where we demonstrate influence over, and some of them more directly relate to what we say we're going to do in the plan. So looking at greenhouse gas emissions, for example, which is about, that's something that we have influence over, but we're not completely in control of. So that's one area where looking at the data that we have right now, we don't have necessarily all the data, but you will see in our street design guide as well designs that work toward that goal, which work toward narrowing up the amount of asphalt or concrete in favor of green space, more green infrastructure. So getting toward those points. And at this stage, we don't necessarily have all the ways to measure and report back on those, specifically on a design by design basis, but you will see running throughout the design guide a philosophy going toward that. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. It's not as specific as probably you were looking for, but that's where we're at the moment.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. And I will note that we are near the end of our time here this evening with everyone, and I hope that you have found this extremely helpful. We only have a couple of questions left on our chat board, one of which is something that we do not have the data for here to provide, but is asking about geolocation of the traffic signals that were recently switched over to be automated in support of the COVID-19 situation. But I can say that about 400 of the over 700 signals that the city manages were recently switched over so that the pedestrian walk signal comes up automatically with each cycle, so that pedestrians do not have to push the button. They can push the button if they need the audio signal. They still can push that button and we'll get that audio signal when they do. But about 400 of the over 700 signals were recently switched over. We just don't have those geolocations available in response to this question right now. And the other question that is left on the chat board is related to questions that have already somewhat been answered throughout this last 45 minutes here with you in the conversation, talking about how, we have a draft plan out right now and COVID-19 has come upon us, and are we looking at making any changes in response to that situation? And what we put forward as visionary 2 months ago might seem under ambitious at this point in time. And so I think we've answered that question somewhat at this point, and we will continue to reevaluate and take that feedback and modify our plans accordingly. So as we're nearing our time with you all today, I do want to acknowledge that we did have other leads with us today that did not receive any questions tonight, and ask them to maybe each talk a little bit more about their topic areas before we close out. So Alexander, a question that did come forward at the last open house, which I thought was extremely helpful, is maybe you could talk a little bit about how we do plan to incorporate freight into our complete streets policy and why that is important.
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. So hi everyone, Alexander. Complete streets is a really important thing that we in recent years implemented into our policies. And as most folks are aware, it's about ensuring that a street, whenever possible, provides bike facilities, if it makes sense, pedestrian and walking, and placing those most vulnerable users kind of at the forefront in terms of priority and safety, but also accommodates vehicles and will accommodate freight. And for example, I was on a reconstruction project on Johnson Street Northeast in Minneapolis, and we had a lot of large vehicle movements that were coming into that space. And we had to really think about how could we, as safely as possible, integrate those vehicle movements, but without reducing, by also minimizing the crossing distance for safe pedestrian movements. And that's just an example of how we are trying to incorporate freight movements into the complete streets policy. On that reconstruction project, we have a shared use path, we have pedestrian facilities, we have a boulevard, we have bus stops as well. And we're still able to create a complete street design that that does serve all those modes. Obviously, bikes and peds and transit users are our most vulnerable users, and we want to ensure that our facilities accommodate them, but we still have to incorporate goods movement in our city. And so it's really about just ensuring that all those features are considered and integrated to the best of our ability within our plans and designs.
Great, thank you, Alexander. And then I'm just going to have Yasna maybe talk a little bit more about the technology topic area that also didn't receive any questions tonight. There's a lot happening in this topic area, and maybe she could talk a little bit more about what the city is doing to prepare for things like automated vehicles, drone delivery, and things like mobility as a service, which will allow trip planning over multiple modes and platforms. So Yasna, if you wouldn't mind just a little bit more on that topic area before we close out this evening.
Thanks, Jenny. So this topic outlines how we will most thoughtfully integrate technology to help us meet our goals. A lot of that includes what you just mentioned, and just really being a testing ground for a lot of new technologies. When it comes to automation and drones, really letting the state take the lead on that, but again, the city being a willing partner and allowing some of that testing to happen here. And there's a lot of other things that we can cover on the next open house as well in terms of mobility as a service and mobility hub pilots.
Great, thank you. So we are at time tonight, and I do want to thank the team again for answering all of these great questions, and for all of you out there who submitted these great questions and continue to read the plan and provide your thoughtful input and questions for us to respond to. We can't do this without you, and we really appreciate your time and energy and thoughts that you're putting into this. We will have one more open house on May 14th, I think it is. Please visit our website for those details. It will be another online opportunity, but our website remains open and interactive and there for you to continue to submit your comments. The questions that remain on our chat board, we will put together some written responses for and post those on our website as we did with the last open house. And we thank you once again for your time this evening.